Good evening, everyone. I think we should make a start. Parshas Vayikra takes us to a very different place from Bereshis and Shemos. I'd like to explain why that is, which will frame, hopefully, the whole shir this evening. When you look at Sefer Bereshis, straightforward. It's the story of our origins. That's what it is, right? Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Shemos is the story of Galus and Geula. It's the journey that we go on as a people and what makes us into a nation, story which will continue in Sefer Bamidbar. What hits you when you begin learning Parshas Vayikra is you are right into the personal, the individual. It's right into an unnamed individual. It's the Odom ki yakriv mikem. A person, don't know who he is, don't know where he is, don't know what situation he is, don't know what the background is, nothing. Odom ki yakriv mikem. Someone who brings a korban. So what do you have in Sefer Vayikra, Parshas Vayikra, is really for the first time, and obviously I mean that in a general sense. We know that we learn the mitzvahs that there are in Sefer Shemos that apply to us as individuals as well as to a tzibur. But for the first time, really, you have the focus on the one person, the human being, the unnamed individual. And therefore, we begin to try and understand, if we learn this parsha correctly, I think, we begin to see how the Torah wants us to view what our personal ideals, our personal responsibilities should be. That, I think, is the lens through which we need to view this parsha. And it's actually a theme which goes through the whole of Sefer Vayikra, but it's particularly evident in the first parsha. So let's begin by trying to understand that word. What does the word Odom mean? Why is the term used? Why is the word Odom used? So on the one hand, you find a number of midrashim that make it very clear that the term is a very inclusive term. That's the nature of the word, of the name Odom. There's various midrashim. There is a midrash, there's actually Yerushalmi, which says Odom lerabos es hagoyim, includes those who are not Jewish. They have the ability to offer korbanos as well, rules and regulations, etc., etc. There are all sorts of approaches that understand the term Odom to be a very inclusive term in that sense. But if you look at Rashi, what does Rashi do? Rashi brings us right back to the pinnacle of creation, brings us back to Odom Harishon himself. Says Rashi, Odom, Loma Nema. Why does it say Odom? Ma Odom Harishon lehikriv min hagezel, just like Odom Harishon did not offer up korbanos from stolen items, stolen property. So too, why? Because everything belonged to him. So you too as well, you must not offer from Gezela. Now, of course, this is not the only reference and the only medrash that makes that link to Odom Harishon. Rashi brings out this particular idea of not using stolen property in order to you can't bring a korban from something stolen, but there are other midrashim that develop the same thing, the link with Odom Harishon himself. What it seems to represent, that connection and the use of the word Odom, of the name Odom, which is not so common in the Torah in this sense, is representing the essence of what mankind is meant to be. That's what Odom is, right? Odom Harishon is the man, is the first man. So it's representing the essence of what humankind is meant to represent. Rav Soloveitchik here brings a medrash he sees something deeper by comparing another use in the Torah in a few parshas time of the name Odom in reference to a personal obligation. The medrash says like this: it's a medrash rabba. Rabbi Yeshua diskinim Shem Rabbi Levi Omar. Afa ksuvim cholku kovod Yisrael. The ksuvim as well, the psukim, bring kovod to Klal Yisrael. Kamod tema, as it says, Odom ki yakriv mikem. A person, a man who offers from you. But when it says something that isn't so nice, that isn't such a nice thing, when we have the introduction in Parshas Tazria to the rules of Toras, there it doesn't say Odom ki mikem ki yeh ba'ar b'soroi, one of you that has in the skin, their flesh, this affliction, elo ki yihiyeh ba'ar b'soroi, that has on the skin of their flesh. In other words, what is the difference? Both places it says the word Odom. Here it says Odom who brings a korban, and there it says Odom who has the tzoras affliction. What's the difference? Says Rav Soloveitchik, the Medrash is trying to bring out here the following idea. When we're talking about bringing a korban, the Torah says, Odom ki yakriv mikem, from within you, from inside you, from your very essence. When we're talking about something like tzorah, something negative, the skin affliction, what do we mean? We don't say mikem, we don't say from you. Why? Because the idea is that when it comes to something, a mitzvah, that is positive, when we're being makriv something, when we're bringing a korban, it reveals the essence. It reveals the essence of who we are. It's Odom ki yakriv mikem. It's deep inside us. It's who we are as human beings. By definition, things which are negative, such as, for example, the averus, which can lead to tzoras, they're external. There's no mikem. There's no mikem. It's not deep within you. When we do something positive, when we do a mitzvah in the right way, when we makriv, there is an inner drive within us to do the right thing, to do fundamentally, we are good people. That's how what we believe. The neshama shnasato bi tahirahi. So when we bring a korban, what are we doing? Odom ki yakriv mikem. It's deep within you. That's what it is. That is the essence of what is represented here. What is striking, though, is that the Torah chooses to reveal that point about the essential nature of who we are, specifically through the concept of a korban. And fundamentally, what a korban is, the word, of course, means, karev means to come near, as we know. By bringing a korban, we are coming near to Hashem. That's the whole idea. The person is drawing close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But at the end of the day, it also fundamentally involves giving up something for a higher cause. That's what a korban is. You have to give something up. You're going to have to give something up. It might be an animal, it might be a bird, but you're going to have to give something up. And here we learn a key message about what it means to be. What is the measure of a man? What is the measure of what a person can achieve? And it's often defined by what we are able to give up. I'll tell you a little story that Primo Levi describes in his book, If This Is a Man. I'm going to say it in his words because it's so powerful, the words he uses. He says like this. He says, an Italian civilian worker brought me a piece of bread and the remainder of his ration every day for 6 months. He gave me a vest of his full of patches. He wrote a postcard on my behalf to Italy and brought me the reply. For all this, he neither asked nor accepted any reward because he was good and simple and did not think that one did good for a reward. Levi is describing his experience in Auschwitz. I believe that it was really due to Lorenzo, that was his name, that I'm alive today. And not so much for his material aid as for his having constantly reminded me by his presence, by his natural and plain manner of being good, that there still existed a just world outside of our own, something and someone, still pure and whole, not corrupt, not savage, extraneous to hatred and terror, something difficult to define, a remote possibility of good, but for which it was worth surviving. And then he says the following words. And this is why I think this is so appropriate for Vayikra, for the Odom ki yakriv mikem. But Lorenzo was a man. His humanity was pure and uncontaminated. He was outside this world of negation. Thanks to Lorenzo, says Primo Levi, I managed not to forget that I myself was a man. What he's dealing with here is the essence of what truly makes us human. For him, humanity was defined by the self-sacrifice, by the sacrifice demonstrated by this ordinary Italian bricklayer, the man contracted to work in the IG Farben factory where Levi himself worked as a slave. And from that summer of 1944 until December, he risked his own life countless times in order to share his rations with this Jewish man, bringing him food every day and nothing in return. Eventually, he was recognized posthumously, he was recognized as righteous among the nations. But what do we see from here? What demonstrated the real humanity of this individual was the fact that he was willing to do something for someone else that involves sacrifice. It involves self-sacrifice. And this Sefer, the Sefer of Vayikra, it's focused almost exclusively, if you look through the whole thing, on the need to develop a broader perspective than our own self-interest. It begins with Korbanos. The main theme, as the Ramban tells us, is Korbanos, the whole way through the Sefer, of course, Korban. But the fact is that it builds up, there's a crescendo there, there is a towards Parshas Kedoshim, which is fundamentally, many of the mitzvahs in Kedoshim are about thinking beyond ourselves. It's willing to give away, whether it's our assets, our time, our energy, when necessary for something that is a noble cause. That's what it is. That is Odom ki yakriv mikem. Our own connection to Odom Harishon, in other words, what defines our essence, what makes us an Odom, is our ability to give something up, is our ability to be makriv, to give something up when it's worthwhile, when it's for an important and a higher cause. We can take this a step further, I think, as well, if we look at the lessons that we learn from the Korban Oni. There are several key messages we learn from the Korbanos that are brought by someone who is of limited means. You look at Rashi, Perek Beis, Posuk Aleph. Rashi says like this. Yeah, it says, "V'nefesh ki sakriv, v'nefesh ki sakriv korban mincha Hashem." A nefesh, a soul, who offers up a korban mincha Hashem. Rashi picks up on the nefesh. Why is the nefesh mentioned in the context of the mincha, the meal offering? Why is this? It says, Rashi, lo nema nefesh b'chol korbanos nedova ela b'mincha. None of the korbanos nedova, none of the things that are optional, that are free will offerings, does it use the word nefesh except for the mincha. Why? Because mi darko lis nadiv mincha. Who is the person who normally gives a mincha, a korban mincha, on oni? Someone who is impoverished. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hashem says, Mala ani olav ki ilu hekrev nafshay. As far as I'm concerned, it's as if he's offered his very nefesh, his very soul. That's what it means. The nefesh, when a person who is of limited means does the very best they can with what they have, they offer up the essence of who they are. There's a beautiful story in the Medrash Rabbah about King Agrippus, who was one of the later the Hashmonaim kings. And he decided one day that he was going to bring 1,000 animals. Yeah, he was going to bring 1,000 olos. He was going to bring 1,000 korban olos. And he asked the Kohen Gadol that because of this incredible number of korbanos that he was bringing, he didn't want to allow any other korban nedovos, any other voluntary korbanos at the same time. No one else could bring because he was taking over the show, if you like, for that day. Anyway, that day, it turned out there was a poor man who arrives in the Beis HaMikdash and he has 2 birds in his hand. And he asked them that it should be offered as korbanos. And the man was told that the king has requested that today there are no other optional korbanos, only the obligatory ones, because today is the king's munificent offering of 1,000 olos. And the man responded like this to the Kohen Gadol, and he said, every day, he says, I catch 4 birds. I bring 2 for korbanos and I bring 2 for my own parnasa. And he says, if you don't offer these korbanos, these birds, you know what you're doing? You're jeopardizing my parnasa. It goes together. The 2 are together. I have these 4 birds. I get 2 for my parnasa and 2 for the Beis HaMikdash. That's how it is. What is the Oni demonstrating? That he understood that it was in the merit of being able to give up the 2 that his parnasa would be successful. That he would be able to get another day where he would catch another 4 birds. It was every day being able to give up the 2 that allowed him to keep 2. That was what he understood. And the Kohen Gadol agreed, and he allowed him to be makriv those birds. And that night, the Medrash says, King Agrippus himself had a dream. And in the dream, the poor man's birds came before his own, all his 1,000 animals. And he found greater favor in Shemayim than his own 1,000 animals, because the Oni brought those korbanos, those birds, with his very nefesh. It was his soul. That was what was bringing. That was bringing the korban in this case. So the lesson we learn, the first lesson we learn from the korban of the Oni, is that no one can judge the level of self-sacrifice of another. Odom ki yakriv teaches us that fundamentally what defines us as human is our ability to be makriv, is our ability to give something up. But no one can define that level of mysterious nefesh for someone else. For the Oni, for the one who has less means, his smaller hakrova is more mikem than the osher. It is more from within him than the osher, potentially, because it is his very nefesh, because he's doing everything possibly in his capability in order to do so, in order to bring the korban. The second lesson we learn from the korban oni is found in Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Zayin, a different representation of the korban oni. It's actually the previous pasuk. The rules around bringing a korban of a bird are very, very surprising. That parsha, beginning of Sheni, begins v'min ha'of oila korban. If his korban oila is a bird, from a bird, and there's various rules on how that works. One of the things that is required to be done In Pasuk Yud Zayin, it says, "V'hiktira shei hakohen hamizbeach." The kohen offers up on the mizbeach. Alo yitzim asher lo'esh, on the wood that's on the fire. Oilohu, it's a burnt offering. Ishei reach nechayach l'Hashem, and it's a reach nechayach. It has a pleasant aroma to Hashem. She says, "V'haloi ein lecha hedyot shemiriach ra shel knofayim nisrofim." The most ordinary of ordinary people who smells the bad odor of burning feathers, right? And he doesn't find it's disgusting. It's just the odor, the aroma is horrible. It's awful. So why does the Torah say you got to offer up the feathers of the bird? Why should you have to do that? Why should that go on the korban? Says the Medrash, Rashi quotes the Medrash, so the mizbech should be made beautiful of the oni, the korban. This is one of those Rashis, my friends. Well, we learn the Rashi, we go through Rashi, right? To next Rashi, next, of course, yeah, very important. Yeah, it's very nice. No. Just think for a second. We've just spent 5 parshas, right? Right? Talking about the incredible exactitude of the Mishkan. Every detail. Rashi brings there, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be beautiful. Every detail of the garment of the Kohen Gadol. Hold on a second. So the whole thing's ready, okay? The Mizbeach is there, and everything's perfect, pristine. In walks the poor guy. He brings the birds, and you're going to stick on the Mizbeach the feathers. The whole thing is going to look awful. It's going to smell terrible. It's going to look... You're ruining everything. You're ruining the Malamid Sh'odom Chosala Yofa. And this is the Reach. This is the Reach Nechayach L'Hashem. This is the pleasant aroma to Hashem. Where's all the beauty gone? How can it be Reach Nechayach? Yet, tells the Medrash, making the Mizbeach Mahuda beautiful with the korban of the Oni, defective as it is, has with the aroma that it is, that is the Ratzon Hashem. That is the Nachas Ruach to Hashem. That's what Hashem wants. As Rashi brings also here in this parsha, whether you do more or less, Hashem. The idea is that Hashem wants your kavanah. It's a complete paradox in how we approach the essence of what the Mishkan represents. We think it's all supposed to look pristine and beautiful. It is, but this is pristine and beautiful. This is beautiful in and of itself. You're familiar with that lovely, wonderful, wonderful story of the 2 brothers, Rebbe Elimelech and Reb Zusha, were thrown in jail. And inside the jail, one of them begins up to daven mincha, and the other one says, how can you daven mincha? There's a bucket in the middle of the floor, which you are supposed to use as the lavatory. You're not allowed to daven. You can't daven mincha in this room. And he starts crying, and he starts being asked, we can't daven. They've even taken away from us the ability to daven. This is terrible. This is awful. How can we not daven? Eventually, one of them says to the other, says, hold on a second. Why are you crying? We're not davening because that's what Hashem wants. Hashem wants us not to daven because this is a place not appropriate for davening. And they start dancing and singing because they're so happy that they're fulfilling the will of Hashem through not davening in a place where you're not supposed to daven. And they're dancing and they're singing, and the guards come along and the guards say, why are you so happy? And they say, we're so happy because we're here in a room with this bucket in the middle of the floor. And that's why we're happy, because we're fulfilling the Ratzon Hashem, the will of our Creator. And the guards get to say to them, that toilet bucket is giving you such pleasure, get rid of it, remove it. And they go and daven mincha, the 2 brothers. Beautiful story. That is what Hashem wants. That is how it is. Now what Hashem wants is not what we define as beautiful. It's what Hashem defines as beautiful. And there's also a powerful message as well with this idea, I think. Think about it like this. Hashem, so to speak, we have to say this in terms that we can understand, gives up so much of the sanctity or the beauty of the Mishkan for the korban of the Oni, to make that Oni feel good, to bulk up the offering. It's like when you receive a delivery from Amazon, the huge packaging, and there's a tiny little thing in the middle, right? That's what he's got. The bird is tiny, but they bulk it all up with all the feathers and everything else, so it looks like something significant. So we ask ourselves, surely, isn't there a message here for us? What are we willing to give up to make someone else feel good? Think about what Hashem does, so to speak. Kaviyachal. Hashem's giving up so much, so the Oni feels good, so that he feels that I've done something significant. So we can ask ourselves as we go through life, what am I giving up to make someone else feel good? And the third idea I'd like to share with you this evening is the idea, you find a theme running through the Parsha on the notion of humility, the notion of anova. And for this, I'd like to, again, share with you, another little anecdote. Really, we know that for many generations, it's been a tradition that when a child begins to learn Chumash, they learn Parshas Vayikra. Right? They begin with Parshas Vayikra. That's how a child begins to learn Chumash, and we have handed down to us from the accounts of how this used to happen in Europe, some beautiful accounts of how they did this and how they introduced the child into what they call the Chumash Cheder. They had the Aleph Beis Cheder and then the Chumash Cheder when the child started learning Chumash. And it actually took place, it's fascinating, it took place actually on a Shabbos. And what they used to do, they were invited to the family. The family used to come into the home and there were tables set, beautiful tables set, and the little boy is dressed in his Shabbos clothes. And the Shabbos clothes would often on this occasion include a pocket watch with a gold chain. He's only a 5-year-old, like a family heirloom. And he would wear this little pocket watch and a gold chain. And the young man would then receive his guests. And then they begin this elaborate ceremony. And what happened was they used to go and he used to stand on top of a table and he's surrounded by the other Cheder boys. And then presumably the Melamed, whoever it was, or the teacher used to stand there and the Rebbe used to go through and say the following dialogue. And although it may not have been exactly the same everywhere, it was something along these lines. The man used to begin by saying, "What's your name?" And the boy used to say, "I'm not," what he used to say, "What is your name, young child?" And the boy would respond, "I'm not a child anymore. I'm a young man. I've now begun to learn Chumash with Mazel and Bracha." And he says to him, "What's Chumash?" And the boy has to answer, "Chumash is 5." And the man says, "What do you mean 5? Maybe 5 rolls for a penny. What is 5?" And he has to answer, of course, there's a whole spiel. He has to answer, these are the 5 books of the Torah. And what are their names? He has to go through Parsha Shiur Vayikra. And then the man says, "If you're indeed someone who's now ready to start learning Torah, what will we be learning?" And the boy would answer, "I will be learning Vayikra." And the man would ask, "What does Vayikra mean?" Maybe Vayikra is the shamas in the shtetl who's calling out in the morning to wake people up. What's Vayikra? Who's Vayikra? And the boy would answer, "No, Hashem called Moshe Rabbeinu and told him about the korbanos in the Mishkan. That's what is Vayikra." And the man would then turn to the boy and say, "What do you have to do with korbanos? What has that got to do with you? Why do you have to learn all of this?" And the boy would answer, "Because the korbanos are tahor. They are pure, and I am a pure Jewish child. Let an innocent child learn about the korbanos." That's the fundamental idea. They are tahor, they are kodesh. Who better than a 5-year-old boy to learn about it? And then the person would ask another question, and he would say like this. He would say, "Why is the letter Aleph in the word Vayikra small?" And the boy would answer, "Because I am a small child, and I will be learning Torah." And Aleph means to learn, represents learning, and the Torah exists only among those who can have humility, can have anova, can have a small little Aleph, and they won't have that sense of arrogance. And then the man would turn around. This was the final catch at the end, and would turn around to the boy and say, "Why are you arrogant?" And the boy would say, "Chas v'sholom, I'm not arrogant." So then the man would say to him, "So why are you standing on the table if you're not arrogant?" And the boy would say, "I'm listening to you and I'm stepping down." And with that, the boy would get off the table and go back and join his friends. Beautiful little spiel, but very powerful. Baal HaTurim tells us this idea, it's developed in other places as well, that the little Aleph at the beginning of the Parsha represents Anova. It represents the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu. What was the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu? What did he do? In what way did he show humility? Says the Baal HaTurim, let's just find the Baal HaTurim. He says like this. He says, Aleph to Vayikra Zira, the Aleph is small. Because he was Godol, he was great, and he was humble. He only wanted to write Vayikra, which is a Lashon Mikra, as if it happened to be without the Aleph. It's only Hashem when he spoke to him in a dream. As it says with Bilam, Vayikra Elokim Bilam, right? It says Hashem happened to be with Bilam. As if Hashem only appeared to him by chance. Hashem says, no, you have to write the Aleph. Hashem said, because of so much humility, he's only going to write it with a small Aleph, smaller than all other Alephs in the Torah, because of that notion of humility. What do we have here? What do we have? It's a remarkable thing. Moshe Rabbeinu wants it to forever look like his nevuah is the same as Bilam. He wants people to look at the word Vayikra and see the word Vayikra, just like it says with Bilam. Hashem happened to speak to him. Why? Because it was worth it for his own anova and his own humility to do so. It was worth it for himself to take that approach. The Zohar says that, in fact, Odom is actually the highest term, the loftiest term for a man. Fits with the Odom Orish. There are many, many different phrases that are used as Ish. Also, the Odom, the Zohar understands, is the highest term. It's the highest form. Yet here, the person who is the Odom is bringing a korban for a chet, even though it's someone who may think they are so significant. The Torah brings them down and says, hold on a second, even an Odom, even someone who considers themselves, who is an Odom, can sometimes do the wrong thing, can sometimes need to bring a korban for doing something wrong. To grow, to have that humility, to have that sense of growth, we have to realize it takes time. It's not something immediate. It's not something that happens overnight. And finally, we have the same idea in Parak Dalad, Posuk Chov Beis. Asher Nosi Echata. The korbanos that a Nosi has to bring when the Nosi does the wrong thing. Now the Nosi is the leader, he's the prince, he's the one in charge, he's one of everything. Asher Nosi Echata. What does he do? V'osa achas mikol. Hamitzvos Hashem elokah asher lo yaseh b'shkogo v'Hashem. He does something that shouldn't be done and describes the korban he has to bring. Says Rashi, Loshen Ashrei, praiseworthy. Ashrei. Ashrei hadar sha'anosi shelo nosin leiv. Praiseworthy is the generation that the leader, the Nosi, thinks and reflects lahovi kapara al shigagosai, to bring an atonement, a kapara for his avera b'shogig, even if his unwitting avera kal v'chol much more so shenischaret al zudoinosov. How much more so must he regret the willful things that he's done? When we talk about the notion of how, as I mentioned, there's this thread of the sense of the requirement of Anova that's running through the Parsha, beginning with Moshe Rabbeinu and the small Aleph, and he's saying that he's willing, he wants it to look like he's the same as Bilam because it's worth it for the Anova. Going through the idea that even a person who is at the level of an Odom, who's already at that higher level, needs to understand that sometimes they do the wrong thing. This idea reaches the pinnacle. It reaches the climax, in this parsha, in this posuk, because the majesty and the beauty of the Torah is that ultimately, when we're talking about the responsibility we have for our actions, when we're talking about the fact that what the essence of what makes us human, we are all the same. There is no one who can say that I'm above the law. Asher Nosi Echata. He might be a Nosi, he might be someone who thinks he is incredibly important. It makes no difference. Asher Nosi Echata. Ashrei, praiseworthy is the whole generation that someone, however great they are, can say, you know what, I did the wrong thing. That is an incredibly high madrega on a high level. It is the fundamental definition, what defines us as Jews, the fact that no one is above the law. There was an interview several years ago in New York. Fascinating, it's on YouTube. Fascinating interview between Simon Sharma, the historian, and the late Rabbi Sachs, Zechron Levracha. And in that interview, they sort of traded ideas between them. There's one moment which is very powerful, and that is that Simon Sharma turns around and says that for him, the most moving story, or he finds that maybe the most inspirational story or whatever in Tanakh, is the story of David HaMelech. David HaMelech and Bathsheba. When Nosson HaNovi comes along to David HaMelech and says, you know, you've done the wrong thing, you shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done it. And he has a whole moshel there, he brings a whole parable, the story of the rich man and the poor man, he took the one from the poor man and everything else. Because it's so incredibly powerful that in Tanakh, there is no one who is above the law. Everyone is responsible. Responsibility runs through us all. It encompasses everything we do. When we learn Sefer Vayikra, what we're really doing is we are defining the measure of a man, the measure of humankind. And the measure of what makes us human is Odom Ki Yakriv. When we're able to give up for a higher cause, when we're able to understand that there are higher causes in life, there is the whole concept of korbanos. When we understand and we learn the lessons of the korban of the Oni, the way the Torah defines the value system, or the nachas, the reach nechoach, as Hashem defines the reach nechoach, is not how we define the reach nechoach. And when we understand that ultimately, if we can go through life with that little aleph, the Vayikra with the small aleph, the Vayikra which says it's worth it, it's worth giving up things in order to develop that sense of humility. So that even a Nossi, however much the embarrassment is, however important they think they are, they can get up and say, sometimes I do the wrong thing too. I need to make sure that I put it right. That is how we can approach, that's how we approach the Sefer, and that's how we grow and will grow from every Parsha and the Korbanos and beyond. I wish you all a very good Shabbos, and thank you all for joining.
Shkoyach, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Shkoyach.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good Shabbos, Shkoyach.
Okay, good Shabbos, thank you.
Thank you very much.